After my own family abandoned me at the airport with nothing in my hands and no one to call, I didn't argue or beg. I made a calm, silent choice that turned the situation around and quietly changed all our futures forever. My name is Leo Vance, and for 32 years, I have lived as a ghost within the machine of my own family. To the outside world, I am the high-achieving, meticulously dressed Chief Operating Officer of Vance Global, a man whose life is a series of sleek glass offices and billion-dollar handshakes. But internally, I am a landscape of eroded soil. My emotional state is not one of acute pain, but of a long, sustained silence that has settled into my bones. I am a man of precision, an architect by training and a fixer by necessity, but I have spent so much time reinforcing the structures of other people's lives that my own foundation has become a hollow shell. I have lived in a state of hypervigilance, always waiting for the next crack to appear in the family facade, always ready with the metaphorical cement to fill it. I am the son who stayed, the son who worked, and the son who believed that if I were only perfect enough, the Vance name would finally feel like it belonged to me too. Then there is Silas Vance, my father. To understand Silas is to understand the gravity of a black hole. He pulls everything toward himself, and nothing, not even light, escapes his influence. At 68, he is a man of iron and ego, possessing a presence that commands the very air in a room to stand still. He does not see people, he sees functions. To him, I have never been a son. I have been a high-performance asset with a regrettable tendency toward sensitivity. Silas operates on a philosophy of absolute dominance, believing that the only way to ensure loyalty is to make it impossible for those around him to survive without his grace. He is the architect of my exhaustion. A man who views my 20-hour workdays not as a sacrifice, but as a basic requirement for the privilege of sharing his bloodline. He expects total submission, masked as professional alignment, and he has spent my entire life making sure I knew that I was a guest in the empire he built. My mother, Eleanor, is the velvet shadow that follows him. She is a woman of impeccable poise and devastating detachment. Her role in our family has always been the curator of our public image, the one who ensures that no matter how much we are bleeding internally, the silks we wear remain unstained. Her personality is defined by a desperate, clawing need for status, and she has long ago traded her maternal instincts for the security Silas provides. She doesn't raise her voice, she raises an eyebrow, a gesture that carries more weight than any shout. Her loyalty is a transactional thing, tied directly to the stability of our social standing. She has never protected me from Silas's coldness. Instead, she has taught me how to endure it with dignity, which is her word for silence. She is the one who reminds me that we are Vances, as if the name itself were a bandage for the wounds the family inflicts. Marcus is my older brother, the crown prince who was born with the world already in his pocket. At 34, Marcus is a creature of immense charm and zero substance, a man who has mastered the art of looking like a visionary while I do the actual sight-setting. He is the golden child who can do no wrong in Silas's eyes, primarily because he is a mirror for Silas's own narcissism. But beneath the expensive watches and the easy smiles, Marcus is a hive of insecurity. He knows he lacks my intellect, my technical skill, and my work ethic, and that knowledge has curdled into a deep, pathological jealousy. He doesn't want to be better than me, he simply wants me to be less than him. He has spent years quietly undermining my authority with our father, framing my caution as cowardice and my precision as stagnation. He is the snake in the garden who convinced the gardener that the most productive tree was actually a weed. Finally, there is Julian Vane, a man who was, for most of my career, the monster under my bed. Julian is our family's greatest competitor, a titan of the tech construction industry who built an empire that threatens to eclipse the Vance legacy. He is a man of legendary intensity, a recluse who values data over bloodlines and efficiency over ego. He is connected to me by a decade of rivalry. I have spent thousands of hours analyzing his moves, trying to predict his next acquisition, and feeling a strange, unspoken kinship with the way he operates. He is the only person who has ever truly challenged me, even from across a boardroom table. He matters because he is the variable my family never accounted for, the one person who saw my worth not as a Vance, but as an engineer of the future. The unspoken tension in our household had been building toward a crescendo for months, centered around the Mirage project. This was to be our magnum opus, a self-sustaining, vertical city in the heart of Dubai that would cement our family's name in history. I had designed every inch of it. I had negotiated the sovereign wealth funds, I had solved the structural impossibilities, and I had stayed awake for weeks to ensure the financial models were unbreakable. But as the departure date for our final signing ceremony approached, the atmosphere shifted. Silas stopped inviting me to the inner circle meetings. Marcus began taking the lead on calls I had initiated. I felt the familiar weight of being sidelined, but I told myself it was just the stress of the project. I believed, with a foolish, desperate hope, that once we were in the air, once we were a family again on our way to success, the old dynamics would soften. There was a secret I had buried deep within the Mirage blueprints, a hidden truth that I had guarded even from my father. I had hinted at a stabilization protocol during our preliminary briefings, a way to ensure the building's integrity against the extreme desert heat. My father had waved it off as technical minutia, his mind already on the press release. I had kept the full details of this protocol on a private, encrypted drive that required a biometric handoff, a key that was hard-coded into my own unique signature. I told myself I did it to protect the project from corporate espionage. But in the quiet hours of the night, I knew the truth. I did it because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I gave them everything, I would have nothing left to negotiate for my own life. I had built a failsafe into the very heart of the Vance legacy, a silent insurance policy against the people who shared my name. The day of our departure for Dubai was a masterpiece of manufactured normalcy. The morning air in New York was crisp and smelled of rain, the sky a dull pewter color that reflected the grayness in my own spirit. We traveled to JFK in a convoy of black SUVs, the tires humming against the asphalt like a low-frequency warning. In the back of the lead car, Silas sat in a silence that felt like a wall. Eleanor was beside him, her gloved hand resting on her purse, her gaze fixed on the passing skyline. Marcus and I were in the second car. He was unusually chatty, cracking jokes about the heat in Dubai and the celebrations to come, but his eyes never stayed on mine for more than a second. He was vibrating with a nervous, triumphant energy that I mistook for excitement. I felt a sense of dread pooling in my stomach, a cold realization that the Mirage wasn't just a project, it was a trap. When we arrived at the terminal, the routine was familiar. The private check-in, the hushed voices of the airline staff, the effortless movement through security. But as we reached the gate, the choreography changed. Silas stopped near the entrance to the VIP lounge and turned to me, his face a mask of patriarchal concern. "Leo," he said, "there's a small issue with the documentation for the models. They're holding them at the cargo office near the secondary terminal. I need you to go down there and sign off on the customs clearance. We'll wait for you at the lounge. I hesitated. Can't Marcus do it? I need to review the final presentation one more time before we board. Marcus is meeting with the lead architect for the foundation, Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, the tone that meant there was no further discussion. Go, Leo. Don't be difficult. It's just a signature. Marcus has your bag and your phone. He'll keep them charged in the lounge so you don't have to carry them through the terminal. I handed my phone and my leather briefcase, the one containing the drive, to my brother. Marcus took them with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Hurry back, little brother, he said. The champagne is already on ice. I watched them walk through the glass doors of the lounge, my family, a unit of 3, leaving me alone in the bustling, echoing cavern of the terminal. I didn't suspect a thing. I was still the loyal soldier, still the one who followed orders because the alternative was the cold, lonely space outside their circle. I began the long walk toward the secondary terminal, my footsteps echoing on the polished stone floors. It took me 30 minutes to realize the cargo office didn't exist. I wandered through the maze of hallways, asking staff who looked at me with blank expressions. When I finally found a supervisor, they told me that all Vance Global cargo had been cleared and loaded onto the private jet 3 hours prior. I felt a sudden, sharp prick of ice in my veins. I turned and ran. I ran back toward the VIP terminal, my lungs burning. The tailored suit I wore feeling like a straitjacket. When I reached the gate, the lounge was empty. The Vance Global signage had been taken down. I looked out the massive plate glass windows and saw the silver and blue tail of our family jet as it pushed back from the gate. I stood there, my hands pressed against the glass, watching the only world I knew taxi away into the distance. They had my passport. They had my phone. They had my money, my laptop, and the drive with 10 years of my life. I was a 32-year-old man in a $4,000 suit with absolutely no way to prove who I was. I looked at the digital display, Vance Global 1, departed. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I simply felt the gravity of my life suddenly disappear. They had planned this for weeks. They wanted the Mirage project to be Marcus's triumph, and they knew the only way to ensure he got the credit was to remove me from the equation entirely. They assumed I would make a scene, get arrested for not having ID, and spend the next week in a bureaucratic nightmare while they signed the contracts in Dubai and announced my unfortunate mental breakdown to the board. I walked to a row of metal benches and sat down. The airport hummed around me, 1,000 lives crossing paths, 1,000 people with destinations and identities. I had neither. I looked at my hands and realized they were shaking, not from fear, but from a strange, terrifying sense of lightness. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being watched. I wasn't being managed. I was just a man on a bench. And then, I saw him. Sitting across from me, a simple paper cup of coffee in his hand and a tablet on his lap, was Julian Vane. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, looking like just another traveler, but his eyes were fixed on me with a terrifyingly focused intensity. They finally did it, didn't they? Julian asked. His voice was quiet, devoid of the mockery I expected from a rival. It was the voice of a man acknowledging a fact. They took the drive, I said, my voice sounding flat and alien. They took a piece of hardware, Leo, Julian said, standing up and walking over to sit beside me. But I've been watching you for a decade. I didn't come here to see the Vances fly to Dubai. I came here to see what you would do when they finally pushed you off the ledge. I knew Silas wouldn't be able to help himself. He's a scavenger, not a builder. He thinks he just stole the future, but he doesn't realize the future is sitting on a bench at JFK with nothing in his pockets. I looked at him, my mind beginning to churn with the speed of a turbine. You were waiting for this? I was betting on it, Julian said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, encrypted smartphone and a temporary travel document with my name on it. I have a private hangar on the other side of this airport. I have a team of lawyers and a server that can bypass anything Silas thinks he owns. I'm offering you a choice, Leo. You can go to the police, you can beg for your life back, and you can spend the rest of your years being the troubled Vance son. Or, you can come with me, and we can show the world what happens when the architect stops holding up the ceiling. I looked at the phone. I thought about Silas's cold eyes, Eleanor's silent silk, and Marcus's triumphant grin. I thought about the secret I had buried in the Mirage blueprints, the stabilization protocol. I realized that Silas and Marcus were currently flying toward a meeting where they would present a project that was, without my final biometric authorization, a ticking time bomb of structural failure. It wouldn't fall down, but it would never pass a single international safety audit, and the financial penalties would be enough to bankrupt Vance Global 10 times over. I hadn't built the project, I had built a cage, and my family had just locked themselves inside it. I don't want my life back, I said, my voice gaining a hard, crystalline edge. I want to build a new one. I stood up and walked away from that gate, leaving the Leo Vance who begged for love behind on that metal bench. I went with Julian to his private hangar. We didn't fly to Dubai. We flew to a secure facility in the Alps, a data center where the air was cold and the machines never slept. For the next 72 hours, while my family was being faded in the desert, I worked with a focus that was almost predatory. Julian gave me the resources I had always lacked, a team that followed my lead without question and a platform that didn't require a family name to function. I didn't sabotage the Mirage project. I didn't have to. I simply initiated the transparency protocol I had hidden in the software. While Marcus was standing on a stage in Dubai, clicking through a presentation he didn't understand, I was remotely unlocking the hidden layers of the project's data for the investors to see. I didn't delete the work, I revealed the truth. I showed the world that the stabilization feature was actually a biometric lock owned solely by me. In the middle of the ceremony, the screens behind Marcus didn't show the finished towers. They showed a single line of text, proprietary architectural integrity locked. Authorization required, Leo Vance. The fallout was a slow-motion car crash that played out on every financial news network in the world. The investors, realizing they had been sold a project they couldn't legally build without a man who had resigned, began to pull their funding within the hour. Silas tried to call me, but my old phone was at the bottom of a trash can in JFK. Marcus tried to bluff his way through the press conference, but the more he spoke, the more the world realized he had no idea how the building he claimed to have designed actually worked. The Vance Global stock price didn't just drop, it disintegrated. But that wasn't the hidden truth. The real secret, the one I only discovered when I used Julian's resources to dig into the deep storage archives of our family's history, was far darker. I found a series of documents from 30 years ago, legal papers Silas had spent a fortune to bury. It turned out that the Vance empire hadn't been started by Silas. It had been stolen from his own brother, my Uncle Thomas, who had been the true genius of the family. Silas hadn't just bullied me, he had repeated a cycle. He had committed my uncle to a sanitarium and stolen his patents to build the firm. My mother had known. She had been the one to sign the committal papers. They hadn't just abandoned me at the airport, they had been practicing for this my entire life. When I finally saw them again, it was 6 months later. I was the CEO of Vance Infrastructure, the company that had just bought the remains of my father's firm for pennies on the dollar. We met in a sterile legal office in Manhattan. Silas looked like a ghost of himself, his power gone, his granite face cracked by the reality of his own obsolescence. Marcus sat in the corner, his golden boy charm replaced by a frantic, hollow-eyed desperation. Eleanor was there too, still wearing her pearls, but her hands were shaking so hard she had to keep them hidden under the table. You destroyed the legacy, Silas said, his voice a dry rasp. You were supposed to be the one who kept it safe. I did keep it safe, I said, leaning back in my chair, feeling a calm that was absolute. I kept it safe from you. You thought you left me with nothing at that airport, Silas. But you actually gave me the only thing I ever needed, the realization that the name Vance was a prison, and you were just a jailer who lost his keys. We're family, Leo, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. We can fix this. Just give us back the Mirage patents. We can start over. I looked at my brother, and for the first time, I felt nothing, no anger, no resentment, just a vast, cold distance. We were family at the airport, Marcus. You had my phone. You had my bag. You had my heart. And you threw it all away for a project you couldn't even explain. There is no starting over. There is only the consequence of the choices you made. I walked out of that room and never looked back. I didn't need revenge. The world had already provided justice. Silas and Eleanor retired to a small house in the country, their social standing gone, their names a punchline in the industry they once ruled. Marcus tried to start his own firm, but no one would take his calls. He eventually took a mid-level job at a firm in a city where no one knew his face, living a life of quiet, unremarkable obscurity. I chose myself. I chose a life where my worth is measured in the integrity of the structures I build, not the approval of the people who share my DNA. I still travel often, and sometimes, when I'm standing in an airport terminal, I look at the people sitting on the benches. I see the tired ones, the ones who look like they're carrying the weight of a whole family on their backs. I want to tell them that the departure of the people you love isn't always a tragedy. Sometimes, it's a release. I am Leo Vance, and I finally know what it feels like to be the architect of my own destiny. The silence of the airport is no longer a purgatory. It is the sound of a world that I built with my own 2 hands, on a foundation that will never, ever crack again. Justice isn't a loud explosion. It's the quiet sound of a man walking toward a gate he chose for himself, holding a passport that finally belongs to him.